For a long time, Daredevil Season 3 has been my most anticipated TV season. And granted, I don't watch a ton of TV, but this was the most excited I can ever remember being for a new season. I've watched all the Marvel Netflix stuff, except for Iron Fist Season 2 so far, and as you'll know if you watched one of my most recent videos, yeah, I like the newer stuff, but I think there's quite a bit they could do to improve them. And I was hoping that Daredevil Season 3 would be the one to implement those things. Also, before you get mad, Iron Fist fans, I haven't skipped it, I'll get back to it and review that and Luke Cage Season 2 down the line at some point. But to be perfectly frank, I'm reviewing this first because I was more excited for this than those others. And not to vaguely spoil how I felt, but I did get through this a lot quicker than those. Anyway, let's get into it.
Who are you? I'm Daredevil.
And hey, straight up, spoilers for Daredevil Season 3. It's been out for a little bit, but I just want to talk about it with freedom, so full-on spoilers. You have been warned. So, I really didn't think this was going to be the case, because Marvel Netflix has let me down to varying degrees before, but I'm happy to say that Daredevil Season 3 is absolutely amazing. It's my favorite season of Marvel Netflix, it's my favorite season of any superhero show, and it's one of my favorite seasons of television, ever. This is close up there with Breaking Bad and Game of Thrones for me. I loved it that much. Cast and character-wise, with this being the third season of the show, and even more than that when you consider Defenders and the other shows that Foggy and Karen have popped up in, you're already well invested in these characters, so they don't need to set them up here or anything. Their arcs can continue, and their interactions are even more interesting now. Charlie Cox has been compared to Robert Downey Jr. as just a spot-on casting choice, and I couldn't agree more. I think generally the Marvel Netflix shows have superb casting, and this is the crown jewel. He is perfect as Matt Murdock and Daredevil. And the duality there is one of the most interesting parts of this season. Matt's character has been through just so much, both emotionally and physically. So to see his trouble dealing with morality and his faith here, especially after everything that was set up in the previous seasons, it's fascinating. Like when you look at something like killing people, his argument with Frank Castle throughout all of Season 2, especially in that rooftop episode, now has transitioned to this, where most of the season he is very intent on murdering Wilson Fisk. It's a very interesting arc, seeing him have to grow past that and deal with all the terrible things in his life. Him questioning God is also interesting, especially when played against his mother or Father Landon. Cause really, after everything this guy's been through, why wouldn't he question everything? From his faith, to his identity, to his purpose, to his own code. His arc is also very satisfying in different ways. You know ultimately the right choice is not to kill Fisk and to keep his moral code, but by that last episode when everything else has failed and Fisk is just an evil, murdering bastard, it is kinda satisfying to see him just fully let the devil out. Knock, knock. And be quite brutal. But then in the end, he stays true to who he is and doesn't kill Fisk, which is also really satisfying and really gives the best of both worlds. He gets to beat the crap out of this terrible human being, but also stays true to himself, and his friends, and his morals, and doesn't kill him. It's perfect. Also, I like that they avoided the hero has memory loss, or isn't the same person mentally that they were before when they come back from the dead thing, because I'm so sick of that cliche. From The Flash to Superman to Harry Hart. They do have it a little, where he's not up to his usual strength, but I mean, that's just logic. A building fell on him. He needs a bit of time to train. And his mindset changing is more interesting than just, oh, he's back and he's crazy, or he's evil, or whatever. Speaking of amazing performances, Vincent D'Onofrio, I think, is just as good of a casting choice as Charlie Cox is for Daredevil. I know there are other versions, but I can't imagine anyone but D'Onofrio in this role. He's not only a complicated villain, but he's so terrifying, like you'd want a villain to be. You just get uneasy when he walks into a room. That being said, he's also not just generic threatening bad guy. Like we got from the other seasons, there's a lot of depth there, and that's still seen here. However, by the end, no matter how much tragic backstory or love for Vanessa they show, you realize, yeah, he's evil, he needs to be taken down. Something I thought was really fun about his character is, because of the way the story progresses, despite how terrible he is, you can't help but be impressed and maybe even admire how he does things. Because when it starts, the show fools you. I was like, wow, Fisk really has nothing. He really is just stuck in prison. But then, as it goes, the show slowly reveals stuff until you realize he's had everything planned out all along, and he's been about 5 steps ahead of everyone else for the entire time. And because the show reveals that in similar time to when the main protagonists discover it, it makes it way more effective, and you feel exactly as hopeless and terrified as they do. That's what makes him so scary to me. Not only that he'll ask for your coat so you can cover your face with it and beat you to death with his giant fists, but that he's always miles ahead of everyone else in terms of planning. The way he starts the season and the way he ends it, having manipulated the FBI and the government and using his power and money to go from prison to this amazing luxury life and being a respected figure in the city, it's just impressive, and it feels totally natural. The biggest new addition to this season is Wilson Bethel as Special Agent Ben Poindexter, and he's amazing too. He reminded me a bit of when they introduced John Bernthal as the Punisher. Not really in a character sense, but just in the sense that he perfectly fits in this world. He adds a very interesting new dynamic to the show in his interactions with Fisk and Matt. The performance is fantastic, and the character is fascinating. Just looking at it for a sec, purely action-wise, he's awesome. I love his introduction. It sets up the character's abilities perfectly. And then character-wise, this was another clever way the show presented its storytelling. I don't know a lot about Poindexter from the comics, but I knew he's gonna become Bullseye. But at the start, I thought he was actually just a stable, everyday, normal guy who has amazing aim. And then the reveal of his girlfriend Julie just actually being this girl he's stalking, it's executed perfectly. And then they keep building and building on it. That's something else the show did really well with a lot of its characters. Slowly building stuff up so you gradually understand exactly who and what they are. His transformation gradually into Bullseye is also totally believable. So yeah, Poindexter, great new addition. Deborah Ann Woll returns as Karen Page, and she's great as always. Not much to say here. She's been great before, she's great here. I'll talk about her solo flashback episode in a bit. Eldon Henson's back as Foggy, and he's really good. Most of the time. More on that later. Joanne Wally, I really liked as Maggie. And I guess it's now mandatory that all these Marvel Netflix shows have some dramatic reveal about a family member. I mean, I like that reveal here, just looking at it as a standalone thing, even though I knew it was coming, because I'm pretty sure Mr. Sunday said something about that a while back. And I really enjoyed their interactions, but I just found it funny that now 3 out of the 4 Defenders have had some super dramatic reveal where someone they didn't think was their family member actually is their family member. And finally, Jay Ali as Nadim was great. Another thing I loved about this is that no character is just purely good or purely evil. Matt, Fisk, Poindexter, and then Nadim all have a lot of layers. And I know that sounds like pretty basic character stuff, but for a show to make this many characters this deep and developed, and do so while keeping the show interesting, and maintaining the pacing, it's really impressive. They could have made Nadim just the stereotypical bad, annoying FBI guy, or superheroic cop who teams up with the heroes. But no, he's a good guy who at times can be annoying, and at times does some bad stuff. Often for good reasons though. And at the end, when he was killed, I was genuinely sad. I'd grown to really like his character despite all the bad stuff he did, and his death was actually emotional. On the whole, the show just does so much right in terms of character, story, and pacing. In my How to Fix the Marvel Netflix Shows video, I think my biggest complaint was the 13 episodes, and I feel like I didn't really make this that clear there. I want these shows to be as long as they need to be to creatively fill their story. I'm not saying they can't be 13 episodes, I'm just saying, so far, it seems like all of these weren't meant to be 13 episodes, based on their story, and they had to pad it out a little bit. However, this is the first Marvel Netflix show that I think perfectly fits the 13 episodes. It is perfectly paced in my opinion. All of the subplots are interesting and tie back into the main story, from Matt with Maggie, to Foggy and his family, to Nadim and his family. Even the police procedural subplot, which in these shows is usually some of the less interesting stuff, is great here. It doesn't really feel like there's any wasted time, nothing feels like filler. This next thing is both the result of everything feeling necessary, and also just how well made and good the show is on the whole, but this is the first one of these since Punisher, maybe, that I didn't have to force myself to get through. And even I might include Punisher in that to some degree. And I know that sounds really bad, but let me explain. I'm just not a binge watch kind of person. I can't imagine watching like 8 episodes of Game of Thrones in one day or something like that, like some of my friends do. It's just not how I operate. And so that's why with these Marvel Netflix shows, my reviews are always so late. It takes me like 2 to 3 weeks to get through these, because I only really can or want to watch 1 episode a day. Even the ones I like Jessica Jones Season 2 or Luke Cage Season 2. I was kind of like, alright, better watch an episode today so I'm not behind. With this show, however, I finished this in 4 days because I was hooked. I wanted to keep watching more. The episode ended and I just clicked watch next because it was so good. It was a weird feeling that I've never really had with these shows before. Even with the great ones, at least not fully. I never got tired of it. It was something I genuinely look forward to watching. Not like an obligation or a chore like some of these turn into. And at the end, and this is what surprised me the most, I was like, you know what? I could have gone for a few more episodes. And not because the story wasn't complete or something, I'm glad there weren't more because it was a perfect fit, but just the quality was so high that it left me wanting more, in the best way possible. Wasn't too long, wasn't too short, it took up the perfect time. And I know when I say there was no filler, people are gonna go, well, what about the Karen flashback? And yes, this does have the obligatory Marvel Netflix flashback episode, but I actually thought it was good. It did stop the story in its tracks a bit, but it wasn't as abrupt or as annoying as it was in, say, Jessica Jones Season 2. I also thought it went a long way in developing Karen, who up until now I liked a lot, but I wasn't super invested in as a character. I mean, I was invested, but definitely not as much as I was after that episode. And of course, it wouldn't be a superhero TV show, and especially not a Daredevil season, without some action. So far, Daredevil easily has the best action out of any of these shows, with Punisher close behind. And that's something I mentioned in that video. I wish we could get back to that phenomenal action from Daredevil, because a lot of this just feels kinda generic or going through the motions. And did they ever deliver on the action here? I honestly never thought they could top the hallway fight from Season 1. The stairwell fight in Season 2 got close, but it wasn't quite there, but the prison fight here in Episode 4 is one of the best action scenes I've ever seen. In anything. Movie, TV show, whatever. It is insane. Firstly, just the action generally, the choreography is fantastic, the stunt work is fantastic, the editing and camera work are fantastic. And it's not just chopping up the footage to the point where you can't tell what's going on, or shaking the camera all the time. You can see what's happening, and because of the choreography, it looks real. The punches look like they actually land and hurt, which sometimes they don't in these shows. It's brutal too, it doesn't hold back. Now, take all of that, and then add a one take that goes on for, I believe it's 11 minutes? But it seems like 20, with this crazy scope of this prison riot in the background. This scene just floored me. How they did this, especially for a TV show, is crazy. It starts relatively small, with Matt just fighting one guy, and then more and more and more enemies keep showing up, and you keep thinking, okay, it's done now, there's no way they could add more. And then they somehow keep adding more. Even the background fights are very well choreographed too. Everything like explosions go off at the perfect time, all the effects and blood look real, Charlie Cox has to act through all of it, and he's still great, and the cuts are really well hidden, so the illusion of the one take is kept throughout the whole thing. It just needs to be seen to be truly appreciated. I was just stunned after watching it. It is certainly not just another hallway fight. Something else I loved in the action was the creative uses of different powers and abilities. Matt's senses used not just creatively in the action, but also in the show as a whole, and I love that they implemented more of the Daredevil stealth here. Yes, he's a brawler and his punches will hurt, but how he sometimes also sneaks around makes the action more interesting. Then Dex's abilities were incredibly entertaining to watch in the action, and also made him incredibly threatening and the action more tense, because he does not miss. So once you're in his sights and he gets something in his hand, you're dead. And this all culminates in the final climactic battle between Matt, Dex, and Fisk, all utilizing their very different fighting techniques, with Fisk just being terrifying brute strength, with the added element of Dex trying to murder Vanessa, and Fisk and Matt trying to protect her. There are too many great action scenes to go through, honestly. It's entertaining, it's well done, it's badass, it's everything you'd want. It feels like the action scenes weren't just an obligation, but really time and effort were put into the planning and execution. And that goes for this season as a whole. It doesn't feel like, oh, we have to make another one. It feels like a story that people genuinely wanted to tell, and a ton of effort was put into making it as good as possible. I know I'm being pretty harsh on a lot of these other shows. I really like most of them, and I'm not saying they didn't have effort put into them. This just had excellent effort along with excellent execution. And really, the combination of all these elements is what makes the show special. It's all of these rich, layered, and interesting characters going through a well-executed, well-paced plot with some fantastic action scenes. The action is amazing, not just because of all the reasons I mentioned, but also because you care about and are invested in the characters in them. And the storylines weave together in ways to create the most interesting conflicts possible. For example, Nadeem wanting the promotion, but then it comes right when Foggy gets witness, and he has to decide what's the right thing to do. The show also takes Daredevil back to his roots, not just with the black suit, which I love pretty much as the red one, but also in terms of tone and the world. As much as I enjoyed Season 2 and Daredevil's role in Defenders, I think this character works best in the more grounded world, which is where we first met him. I'm pretty sure Charlie Cox said something similar in an interview, but at the point where he's fighting magical ninjas in ancient societies over immortality juice from dragon bones, I don't know, I feel like it's ironically less interesting than when it was simpler. And that's what this does. There are really no magical or supernatural elements here. It's just Matt Murdock trying to take down crime and Wilson Fisk in a relatively grounded, dark, down-to-earth show. I love The Flash and Arrow and Agent Carter and all that because of their comic bookiness and fun ridiculousness. But I also love this, which is darker and more serious. Crazy, I know, but you can love both for different reasons. This season also does have quite a few funny moments when it fits. There are a few other things here. I like the creative ways they showed flashbacks and also what characters were thinking. The whole Dex backstory being told in Fisk's penthouse, with him watching, was a clever way of doing a flashback that could have otherwise been kinda dull. It was done in a way I don't think I've ever really seen before. And Wilson Fisk, and at one point Jack Murdock being the voice in Matt's head. At first, I was a bit on it. It seemed like a bit of a superhero cliche, even in this very Netflix Marvel world. But it grew on me, and was a good way to have that inner monologue. Matt does spend a lot of time with himself here, and you can't really have thought bubbles in a live-action show. So this was, at the very least, a visually interesting way to convey the information we needed. One of my biggest problems with these shows is that they start to feel kind of similar after a while, and have started to follow a bit of a formula. And while the show did have a bit of that, flashback episode, supporting character dies, etc., I didn't find it very distracting. I think that's because A, everything inside that loose formula was so well executed that I didn't even really notice it, and it all felt like it actually fit the story and wasn't just thrown in off a checklist. And B, it did actually do some new stuff and subvert my expectations. For example, I was pretty certain Nadeem was gonna die in episode 7, but he didn't, which pleasantly surprised me. Also, the big Marvel Netflix twist actually surprised me and caught me off guard with that Agent Hatley thing. I didn't expect that, so more props to the show. Also, as far as location, if any of these heroes are suited to dark hallways and alleys and all that, it is 100% Daredevil. This doesn't really have any tie-ins to the MCU. Frank Castle and Jessica Jones are mentioned. There's a Parker Morales poster, but that doesn't actually have to do with Spider-Man. But yeah, nothing much. And while I do want to see these cross over more, this is definitely good enough to stand on its own like that. The show is very well shot. That Marvel Best Shots Twitter account is going to have a field day with this. The music also, I can't really remember any specific pieces, like I couldn't hum it for you, but in the actual scenes, it was very good. I like the whole theme of this season, about your mistakes not having to define you. That goes for Matt, that goes for Matt's mom, that goes for Karen, that goes for Nadeem, and it even goes for the villains, but in the opposite way, that they let their mistakes define them. This season also just has so many awesome moments, just like sprinkled in between the rest of the greatness. There are certain very memorable moments that just made me grin from ear to ear, like Matt catching the Daredevil club in front of Foggy's face, or Matt coming to save Nadeem's family, and then him revealing his identity to Nadeem, or Matt blocking Dexter's shots with those makeshift clubs, or Foggy saying Nelson and Murdoch, attorneys at law. Just cool moments, not much else to say. I feel like the show avoided quite a few superhero cliches, but it still is a superhero show, and it used the best and most fun superhero tropes where it fit. Like at the end, after Matt's just really been on the back foot the whole time, and gotten beaten up so much, having him finally being a step ahead and taking control and calling out Dex, it's one of those moments where you can cheer for the hero finally, to beat this really hateable villain. As much as you may feel sympathy for these villains at times, by the end it's clear that they're terrible people and they need to be taken down, and being able to root for the hero to do that is really fun. There are also a few emotional moments here, like Father Lantom's death. The emotional core though for me was the friendship between Foggy and Matt and Karen. Maybe because I've watched the show since day one, so I love them together. But because they've been through so many tough times in their lives and friendship, specifically in this season, it's so emotionally satisfying to finally see them make up and become friends again. And you know what? I love that this just had a happy ending. Straight up. Yeah, it sets up the next season, but I mean, in terms of main characters, it's just happy. These kinds of shows always end on maybe a darker note, or a really ambiguous note, or a dramatic cliffhanger, and that can absolutely work as well. But what can I say? I'm a sucker for happy endings, and seeing Matt, Karen, and Foggy being friends again, and also working together again, it just made me feel good. They'd been through so much this season, so to see it just cap off with them not crying, or one of them about to get shot or something, just being friends, I don't know, I love that. And this is also one of the very few, if not only Marvel Netflix show that I can actually see myself going back to in the future. I don't go back to TV generally, besides stuff like The Office, and especially not many of these shows, even the amazing ones. So the fact that when I finished this, I was like, yeah, in a few months, I might go back and watch this again, that says a lot. So really, I love this show, obviously. Are there any negatives here? Yes, I do have a few small gripes. Pretty much all of these are small nitpicks, but this is a review, and I feel like I should still mention them even if they didn't really affect my overall enjoyment of the show. They are still there. There are a few moments of coincidence towards the start that are a bit dumb. Like the first person that Matt saves when he starts daredeviling again is the father of a TV star who then Karen Page ends up getting assigned to cover. Not sure what the odds of that are. There are also a few dumb lines, especially, and really only in episode 2. But the thing is, the rest of the dialogue is really stellar, so when there's some really cheesy moments like the police officer right next to Matt Murdock going, "They just let Wilson Fisk out of prison," or the "thank God for you" line, I don't know, not as good as the rest I felt. Also, I love Foggy, I really do, but I'd be lying if I said there weren't a few moments here and there where the acting wasn't amazing. Most of the time he's great, but there are a few times where he's not great. Foggy meeting Matt again for the first time, I felt was a little bit rushed and not as emotional as I'd hoped it'd be after all that build-up. But I guess maybe that's to reflect how Foggy felt about the whole thing. There were also a few moments in the action where I was confused as to the ability and strength of certain characters. Like, could Melvin really tackle and beat up a bunch of SWAT or FBI agents, or whoever they were, heavily armed and armored soldiers? Does he have some great superhero strength I don't know about? Could he also really hold his own against Matt Murdock, who beat up the immortal Iron Fist and fought ninjas? Again, nitpicks. It's a comic book thing, and it does make for some great action. It's just something that stood out slightly. And finally, the last shot with Dex and the bullseye logo in his eye was really, really cheesy. And as I've mentioned, I really have no problem with cheesy in my superhero shows. But it just didn't really fit here. The image itself and that fast zoom, it felt like something out of The Flash. And again, nothing against that show. I love it for different reasons, but the tones here are very different. And that moment just felt really tonally out of line for this, and ended it on kind of an note for me. Still, excited to see more Dex in the future. I'd love to see a Dex versus Frank Castle fight at some point down the line. Also, they do kind of skip over the details of how Matt survived a giant building falling on him. But hey, whatever. I don't know if this show's writers had any control over how Defenders ended and where it would leave Matt, so not a big deal. Look, I really want to give this a 10 out of 10, because it had so many amazing moments divided through a compelling story with fantastic characters. But like I mentioned, there are some small things that bug me. Very, very small things, but that means it isn't perfect. Overall though, Daredevil Season 3 is about as close to perfect as I could want one of these seasons to be. It's everything a superhero show should be, and everything a TV show in general should be. Action, characters, story, music, themes, pacing, visuals, it's all there. Believe the hype. I'll give Daredevil Season 3 a 9.8 out of 10. And now here's how I'd rank the Marvel Netflix shows that I've seen so far. So those were my thoughts on Daredevil Season 3. What did you think of it? Let me know all of your thoughts down below in the comments. While you're at it, be sure to like this video, check out my Instagram and Twitter at BHL_Hudson, check out this podcast about movies and TV and whatnot I do every so often with a friend of mine. It's called The Poorly Planned Podcast. And subscribe for more videos like the one you just watched. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.